welcome no images, no distractions, just rain or fire sounds and a story. This narration is designed to help you relax, drift, or disappear into the dark. If you're still awake, comment below what country are you listening from, and is this your bedtime? Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future nights like this. Story 1. The Cabin That Never Forgets Its Guests. I should have burned the guest book. My name is Miguel, and that's the only thing I am certain of anymore. It started, as these things often do, with an inheritance. My great uncle Elias, a man I'd met twice, left me a remote cabin in the pine forests of the Pacific Northwest. The lawyer's letter called it a quiet retreat, a place to finish my novel. I saw it as a Getsenda-free, isolated space away from the rent and the noise of the city. A writer's dream. The drive up was beautiful, all towering Douglas firs and mist clinging to the mountain roads. But the beauty had a silent, watchful quality to it. The cabin itself was exactly as described. Rustic, charming, nestled in a clearing at the end of a long, private driveway. The air smelled of damp earth and pine resin. The first unsettling detail was the lock, or rather, the lack of one. The heavy oak door had a simple iron latch, no deadbolt, no key. The second was the cleanliness. For a place supposedly shuttered for years, there wasn't a speck of dust, not a single cobweb in the high corners. It smelled of lemon polish and wood smoke, as if someone had just left. The third was the guest book. It sat in the center of the rough-hewn dining table, a thick leather-bound tome with a brass clasp. The first page had a handwritten note, "For our stories, so we are never truly gone. Elias." I shrugged it off as eccentric. The first night was peaceful, just the crackle of my fire and the wind in the trees. I wrote more than I had in months. On the second night, I heard the scratching, a soft, persistent sound like a branch against the window. But there was no tree near that window. I checked, my flashlight beam cutting through the inky black. Nothing. I told myself it was an animal. The next day, while exploring, I found the root cellar. The door was set into the hillside behind the cabin, secured with a heavy padlock that was cold to the touch, even in the afternoon sun. I didn't have the key. The scratching returned on the third night, louder, more rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Scratch. It moved from the window to the front door. My heart hammered against my ribs. I peered through the curtain, seeing only my own pale reflection staring back. I called out, "Hello." The silence that followed was absolute, not even the sound of insects. It was a silence that felt like a held breath. I spent the night on the couch, a kitchen knife on the coffee table, jumping at every creak of the old timber. Here's a question for you guys, watching this in your well-lit rooms. What's your biggest fear? Is it the thing outside your window? Or is it the slow, dawning realization that the thing might already be inside with you? The next morning, in the harsh, rational light of day, I felt foolish. Of course it was an animal, probably a raccoon. Proved to myself I was in control, I decided to sign the guest book. I opened the clasp, the leather creaking. The pages were filled with elegant, old-fashioned script. Names, dates, and short entries. Harriet James, June 1923. A sublime escape. The silence sings. Robert, October 1947. The trees whisper such interesting things. The entries went on for decades. The last one was from my uncle, just 3 months before he died. Elia's, August. Almost time to come home. Cellar is full. A chill went through me. I flipped back a page. An entry from 1982 read, David. I hear them in the walls. They like my stories. I slammed the book shut. That evening, the noises changed. They became voices. Not clear, intelligible words, but murmurs. Fragments of conversation drifting from the stone fireplace, as if carried on the smoke. I heard a child's laugh from the empty bedroom. The smell of lemon polish grew stronger, now mixed with the faint, coppery scent of blood. I was losing my mind. I grabbed my keys, resolved to drive to the nearest town and never return. My car, which had started perfectly that morning, was dead. Not a click, not a groan. The battery was stone cold, the cables firmly attached. My phone had no signal. The landline, a vintage rotary phone on the wall, emitted only a soft, wet static. I ran back inside, barricading the door with a chair. That's when I saw it. Words, fresh words, were appearing in the guest book. Ink seemed to well up from the paper itself, forming a new line beneath my uncle's entry. It wrote itself in a swift, cursive hand. Miguel, September. Your story is just beginning. Panic became pure, unadulterated terror. I grabbed the book, intending to throw it into the fire. The leather was warm, almost pulsing. The clasp burned my fingers. I dropped it. As it hit the floor, it fell open to a page near the middle. The entry there was different. The handwriting was mine. It was a paragraph from the chapter Id. Been writing that very afternoon. Story 2. Why I never unpack in new places. I am writing this from a closet, and I think I finally understand why the last guest left all their things behind. My name is Ava, and 3 days ago, I arrived at this beautiful, remote area in the pine forests of the Pacific Northwest. It was supposed to be a digital detox, a month-long writer's retreat to finally finish my novel. The listing photos showed a stunning modern cabin, all glass and dark wood, perched on the edge of a serene, misty lake. It was perfect. Too perfect, maybe. But I was too desperate for solitude and a change of scenery to listen to that little voice. The drive up was an 8-hour journey that gradually stripped away civilization. The paved roads gave way to gravel, and the gravel to a narrow, winding Forest Service track that my sedan barely handled. When I finally pulled up, the cabin was exactly as pictured, but the silence was heavier. It was a physical presence, broken only by the distant cry of a lone bird. The first thing I noticed, A subtle, unsettling detail was the smell. Not a bad smell, but a very specific one. Old books, pine sap, and beneath it, the faint, sweet tang of wood smoke, as if a fire had just been put out. The second detail was the porch light. It was on, flickering slightly in a steady, arrhythmic pulse, even though it was the middle of the afternoon. The third was inside. In the otherwise immaculate, minimalist kitchen on the enormous island sat a single, chipped ceramic mug. It was clean, but it sat there like a period at the end of an unspoken sentence. I shrugged it off. Previous guest, careless host. I started unpacking my car, but a sudden, irrational wave of fatigue hit me. It felt like the forest itself was pressing in, urging me to settle, to be still. So I did something I never do. I left my suitcases by the door, all of them. I told myself I'd unpack later, that I just needed to get my bearings. I took only my laptop bag and a small duffel with essentials upstairs to the loft bedroom. The first night was quiet, profoundly so. No insects, no rustling of animals, just an absolute void of sound. I slept deeply, dreamlessly, for 12 hours. It was the best sleep I'd had in years. I woke up feeling refreshed, ready to work. That's when I found the first note. It was a small, cream-colored slip of paper, tucked under the keyboard of my laptop. In neat, elegant cursive, it read, Ava. The view is better from the guest room. I stared at it, my blood running cold. How did it get there? I'd been alone. The doors were locked. I checked the guest room, a smaller, cozier space at the back of the cabin. Its window offered a view not of the lake, but of a dense, dark wall of firs. It was not better. I convinced myself I'd brought the note with me, that it was a scrap from my planning, stuck to something. I crumpled it up and threw it in the kitchen bin. I spent the day trying to write, but the silence was no longer peaceful. It felt attentive. I kept catching movement in the periphery of my vision, just a shadow shifting, a gleam of light where there shouldn't be one. That evening, as I made dinner, I opened the fridge. On the top shelf, centered perfectly, was another note. This one said, Ava, the forest is hungry. Don't feed it after dark. Okay, viewers, I have to ask, because this is where my own logic started to fail me. Have you ever had something in your own home move? Not like, oh, I misplaced my keys, but something deliberately, obviously out of place. That feeling of violation is a special kind of cold. Let me know in the comments. I didn't sleep that night. I barricaded the bedroom door with a chair and lay in bed, listening. Just before 3 a.m., I heard it. A sound from downstairs, not a crash or a bang. It was the soft, deliberate zip of one of my suitcases being opened. Then a pause. Then another zip. It went down the line, from suitcase to suitcase, methodically. Someone was going through my unpacked belongings. Terror glued me to the mattress. I heard footsteps then, not on the hardwood, but on the area rug in the living room, a muffled, shuffling tread. They came to the base of the stairs, and then they started climbing. One creak, then another, each one closer. chair id wedged under the doorknob began to tremble, not from force, but from the gentle, insistent turning of the knob itself. Back and forth, with a patience that was utterly inhuman. I stopped breathing. The turning stopped. I heard the footsteps descend. At first light, I flew downstairs. My suitcases were exactly where I left them, zipped shut. But the kitchen bin was empty. The crumpled note was gone, and the chipped mug from the island was now sitting on the coffee table, a cold inch of black tea inside it. This was the moment of false safety. The sun was out, dappling the forest floor. The lake sparkled. The sheer normalcy of the daytime world made the night feel like a bad dream. Maybe it was sleep paralysis. Maybe id imagined it all. I called the host, a man named Robert, whose voice was eerily calm. "Oh, the notes," he said, chuckling lightly. "That's just old Mrs. Gable, the caretaker. She's a bit eccentric, likes to welcome guests in her own way. She must have popped in while you were out. She has a key, harmless. He assured me he'd speak to her." I felt like an idiot, an eccentric old lady. Of course, the relief was immense. I actually unpacked. I put my clothes in the dresser, my books on the shelf, my toothbrush in the bathroom. I claimed the space. It felt like breaking a fever. I worked. I made lunch. I even went for a short walk by the lake. As dusk approached, I felt a twinge of unease, but I fought it. I was being silly. I lit a fire in the magnificent stone fireplace, poured a glass of wine, and tried to enjoy the cozy atmosphere. That's when the whispering started. It wasn't coming from one place. It was in the rustle of the leaves outside, in the crackle of the fire, in the groan of the cabin's timbers. Faint, sibilant voices, just below the threshold of understanding. I turned up the music on my phone. A new song started, one I didn't recognize, a slow, mournful folk tune. I went to skip it, but the screen was off. My phone was dead. The music was coming from inside the cabin, from the walls. I ran to the guest room, the one from the note. Maybe it was safer. Maybe I could lock that door better. I slammed the door shut and turned. The room had changed. My things, the things I had just unpacked, were here. My clothes were neatly folded in a pile on the bed. My books were stacked on the nightstand. My toothbrush was in a glass by the sink. And on the wall, written in what looked like charcoal or ash, were words covering the entire surface. AVASDAY, AVASDAY, AVASDAY. The doorknob to the guest room began to turn. I backed against the window, the one facing the wall of furs. In the reflection of the dark glass, I saw the door behind me swing open, but not into the hallway. The reflection showed the door opening into my own bedroom loft from downstairs. And standing in that doorway in the reflection was a figure. It was tall, impossibly so, its limbs elongated and jointed wrong. It wasn't made of shadow, but of the absence of thingsa outline of vacancy, where the light and details of the room should have been. Its head was tilted, regarding the reflection of me, trapped in the glass. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. The figure in the reflection stepped into the loft. same moment, I felt a breath on the back of my neck, cold and smelling of damp earth and that sweet wood smoke. The real thing was behind me in this room. It wasn't in the reflection. The reflection was a window to where it was. It had been in the main cabin all along. The climax was not a chase. It was an understanding. The whispering coalesced into a single, clear sentence in my mind, spoken in a chorus of dry, rustling voices. You unpacked, you stay. Everyone who unpacks stays. We are so hungry for new stories. I threw myself at the window. It didn't shatter. It bent like gelatin, then snapped back, throwing me onto the floor. The thing behind me made a dry, rustling sigh of contentment. I scrambled on my hands and knees, out the door, down the stairs. I didn't look back. I ran out into the freezing night in my socks, toward my car. The keys were still in the cabin. I didn't care. I ran down the Forest Service road, branches whipping my face, the darkness absolute. I was found by a park ranger at dawn, hypothermic and babbling. They took me to a hospital. They asked about the cabin. I told them everything. The ranger, a woman with tired eyes, just nodded slowly. That's the Gable place, she said. The family built it generations ago. They never left. They think guests who make themselves at home are accepting an invitation to join the family. Permanently. She showed me a file. Photos of the cabin interior from past police reports. In the background of one, on the bookshelf, I saw my own copy of The Haunting of Hill House. In another, dated 10 years prior, a faded sweater I recognized as my own was draped over a chair. I am back in the city now, in my new apartment. My things are here, delivered by a bemused moving company the host hired. But I can't bring myself to unpack. The suitcases line my hallway, still zipped shut. And sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet, I hear a familiar, soft sound from the hallway. A gentle, deliberate zip, followed by the faint, sweet smell of a recently extinguished fire. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you felt that chill down your spine, you know why I can't look at a suitcase the same way anymore. If you enjoyed this tale of a retreat that became a trap, please show this video some love, give it a thumbs up. It helps more than you know. And subscribe to the channel for more weekly journeys into the unexplained. I have so many more stories to share. Until next time, stay curious, but maybe stay packed. Story 3. What my grandmother left in the attic. I don't believe in ghosts, but I believe in the thing that wore my grandmother's face. My name is Priya, and my horror story begins with a key, an inheritance, and the profound mistake of thinking you know your own family. When Nanny passed, she left her sprawling, old-world bungalow on the outskirts of the Misty Hill station to me, her only grandchild who shared her sight, as she called it. I always thought she meant her terrible eyesight. I was wrong. The normalcy was a quiet, dusty kind. I arrived at Shanti Niwas' house of Pisan, a damp October afternoon. The air thick with the scent of pine, and and decaying marigolds from the overgrown garden. The house was exactly as I remembered from childhood summers. Dark teak furniture, the persistent smell of sandalwood and mothballs, and the unsettling collection of antique dolls that lined the shelves of the sitting room, their glass eyes seeming to track you. The only changes were the layers of dust and a profound, waiting silence that felt heavier than it should. The solicitor's letter had mentioned some unusual provisions in the will, but I'd been too grief-stricken to focus, just eager to sort through her things and maybe find some closure. I noticed 3 things immediately that first evening, subtle details that my city brain dismissed. The first was that all the clocks in the house, different styles from different centuries, were perfectly synchronized and ticking in a soft, unnerving unison. The second was that every mirror was covered with a thin, black silk cloth. And the third was a faint, sweet, coppery smell that seemed to emanate from the walls. A smell I couldn't place, but that made the back of my teeth ache. I spent the first few days unpacking, airing out rooms, and trying to ignore the creeping sensation of being studied. The dolls were the worst. I decided to box them up, but every time I turned my back, one would be out of the box, placed neatly back on its shelf. I chalked it up to my own distracted grief. The nights were different. That's when the sounds began. Not bumps or screams, but whispers. They weren't in the room with me. They seemed to come from inside the walls. A faint, rhythmic chanting in a language I didn't recognize, but that felt familiar in a bone-deep, wrong way. It was always accompanied by a slow, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the attic floor above my bedroom. The attic. Nanny had never allowed me up there. The key, a large, ornate iron thing, was in her desk drawer with a note in her spidery script. For Priya, only when the house is ready. I assumed she meant when it was clean. So, viewers, let me ask you something while I am still in the relatively calm part of this story. Have you ever inherited something? A piece of jewelry, a book, a piece of furniture that just felt off? Like it carried a weight that wasn't physical. Comment below. I am genuinely curious. The escalation was methodical, a tightening vice of the uncanny. The whispering grew clearer, though not in words. It became a melody, a dissonant lullaby Nanny used to hum, but twisted. I started dreaming of the attic door opening on its own, of a dark figure standing at the foot of my bed, its shape shifting like smoke, but smelling of that same sweet copper odor. I'd wake with a start, the taste of metal on my tongue. One afternoon, while trying to hang a picture, I knocked a doll from its shelf. Its porcelain head cracked open, and instead of hollow ceramic, it was packed with what looked like aged, blackened hair and tiny, brittle bone-spurt bones, maybe. That's when I stopped rationalizing. I called a local handyman to ask about the attic door, maybe to reinforce the lock. He came, took one look at the heavy, bolted door at the end of the upstairs hall, refused to go near it. "That's not a door for the living, miss," he muttered, crossing himself in a gesture that felt alien in this Hindu household, before leaving without another word. His fear sparked my own, but also a desperate, stubborn need for answers. The false safety came after a particularly silent night. No whispers, no dragging. The morning sun streamed through the windows, bold and bright. I felt foolish. Grief and isolation were playing tricks on me. I decided to finally tackle the attic, to face the heart of my unease, and prove to myself it was just a storage space full of memories. I retrieved the heavy iron key. It was ice cold despite the warm room. The lock turned with a screech that echoed through the silent house. The door swung inward onto profound darkness, and a wave of that sweet, coppery smell, now mixed with dust and age. I flicked the light switch. Nothing. Using my phone's flashlight, I ascended the creaking wooden stairs. The attic was not filled with trunks and old furniture. It was a temple, a shrine. The walls were painted with intricate, fading murals depicting scenes of reverence and consumption. Figures offering something to a shadowy form. In the center of the room stood a low stone altar, stained a deep, dark color. Arranged around it in a perfect circle were the rest of Nanny's dolls, their heads all turned to face the altar. And on the altar lay a single, ancient-looking book bound in what appeared to be leather, its cover embossed with a symbol that made my vision swim. This was the sight she meant. Not poor eyesight, but the sight to see what she served, what our family had apparently served for generations. The horror wasn't a ghost. It was a lineage, a covenant written in something older than blood. The climax happened as I reached for the book, my fingers trembling. The moment my skin touched the cover, the attic door slammed shut below me. The whispers erupted from the walls, not whispers anymore, but a cacophonous, chanting chorus. The shadows in the corners of the room thickened, pooling and flowing towards the altar. From that darkness, a form coalesced. It was Nanny, or a photograph of her stretched and distorted. She wore her favorite blue sari, but her eyes were pools of that same absolute darkness, and her smile was too wide, showing too many teeth. "Priya Beta," the thing said, its voice a chorus of the whispers and Nanny's own gentle tone, horribly blended. "You opened the door. You are ready. The house is ready for you now. It is your turn to feed the walls, to keep the peace." I stumbled back, my phone flashlight dancing wildly. "Nanny, what is this? What are you?" "The peace has a price, my dear," the thing crooned, gliding closer. The sweet copper smell was overwhelming. A little life given now and then. A stranger passing through, a lost traveler. The house grants us long life, prosperity, protection. In return, it hungers. I tended it. Now you must. It gestured to the altar, and I saw then the drain carved into its center, leading down into the house itself, into the walls. The dolls weren't decorations, they were markers, vessels. I screamed and bolted for the stairs, shoving past the spectral form. felt like pushing through cold, static-filled smoke. I fell down the last few steps, scrambled up, and slammed the attic door, turning the key. The iron was now burning hot. I threw it down the hall. For a long time, I sat on the floor, sobbing, listening to the frantic scratching from the other side of the door, and Nanny's voice, now petulant and angry, calling my name. By dawn, the sounds had stopped. I left Shanti Niwa's that morning. I took nothing, not even my suitcase. I told the police it'd been spooked by squatters, by the isolation. They humored me. I sold the house for a pittance to a development company from the city. Last I heard, they were planning to tear it down to build a resort. I try to tell myself that's the end of it, that the thing in the attic, the hunger in the walls, died with Nanny's departure and will be bulldozed into rubble. Last night, in my sleek, modern apartment in the heart of the city, miles and miles away, I heard it. Faint, but unmistakable beneath the hum of the refrigerator. The slow, steady, dragging sound. And when I looked in my bathroom mirror this morning, for just a second before I ripped the cloth away, I saw the reflection of the attic door, slightly ajar, behind me. The house might be far away, but some inheritances, it seems, are not tied to place. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you felt that chill, that sense of something lurking just out of sight, then you understand why I had to share this. If you want to hear more tales of terrifying legacies and things that should not be, please give this video a like. It helps more than you know. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next story. And most importantly, tell me in the comments, what would you have done with the key? Story 4. The cabin that remembers everything. I still can't explain why I didn't burn that place to the ground the moment I saw the attic. My name is Marcus, and 6 months ago, I inherited my grandfather's cabin. It wasn't a surprise. I was his only living relative, and he'd been a recluse up in the Washington woods for as long as I could remember. My parents rarely visited, always offering vague excuses about the drive and the damp. The envelope from the lawyer contained a single heavy iron key and a deed to a property called Hemlock Rest. The name felt like a joke. There was no rest to be had in that place. The drive up was beautiful, the kind of pristine wilderness you see on postcards. But as the paved road gave way to gravel, and the gravel to a single, muddy track choked with ferns, the beauty turned claustrophobic. The trees leaned in, their branches scraping the roof of my Jeep like skeletal fingers. The first unsettling detail was the silence. No bird song, no rustle of squirrels. Just the oppressive, muffled quiet of deep woods. The second was the smell that hit me when I finally parked in the overgrown clearing a damp, sweet rot odor, like forgotten apples and wet earth, that clung to the back of my throat. The third was the cabin itself. It wasn't the rustic, charming lodge I'd have imagined. It was a dark, 2-story structure of stained logs, with windows that seemed to swallow the light rather than let it in, and every single window was spotlessly clean. I used the heavy key in the stout oak door. It opened with a groan that sounded too much like a sigh. The interior was a time capsule of the 1970s. Avocado green appliances, shag carpet the color of dried blood, wood paneling on every wall. It was dusty, but not neglected. It felt maintained, as if someone had been keeping it ready. I dropped my duffel bag by the worn sofa, the dust motes dancing in the single shaft of light from the doorway. I told myself it was just the strangeness of the situation, the weight of inheritance. I was a city guy, a graphic designer used to the constant hum of traffic and Wi-Fi. This profound quiet was playing tricks on me. The first night, I heard the scratching. It was a soft, persistent sound, like a dog wanting to be let in, coming from the base of the stairs that led to the second floor. I shone my phone's flashlight, heart thudding. Nothing, just the old, knotted wood of the stair riser. I wrote it off as a branch against the house, or maybe a mouse in the walls. But then, have you ever had that feeling, that primal, gut-deep certainty that a sound isn't natural, that it has an intelligence to it? That's what the scratching felt like. It wasn't random. It was a request. The next day, I tried to settle in. I explored the main floor, finding my grandfather's things exactly as he'd left them. A pipe on a stand, faded copies of Field Stream, but there were no photographs, not a single one. In a house filled with a man's life, that absence was a void. It felt intentional, like the cleaning of the windows. That's when I found the locked door. It was in the hallway, narrow, and painted the same dark brown as the paneling, almost invisible. A small, old-fashioned keyhole stared back at me. It didn't match the iron key I had. I tried the kitchen drawers, and in the very last one, under a pile of yellowed linens, I found a small, tarnished silver key. It fit perfectly. The door opened onto a steep, narrow staircase leading up into utter blackness. The smell from outside that sweet, cloying rot was stronger here, pouring down the steps like a physical thing. My flashlight beam cut a shaky path up the stairs. The attic was not an attic. It was a room. A finished room with the same wood paneling as downstairs. And it was filled with shelves, dozens of them lining every wall, crammed with objects. Not junk, specific, ordinary, chilling objects. A child's red mitten crusted with dirt. A cracked pair of eyeglasses with one lens missing. A single, tarnished silver earring in the shape of a feather. A businessman's leather wallet, brittle and dry. A ceramic doll's head, one eye cracked. Each item sat on its own shelf, neatly spaced, like artifacts in a museum of the lost. A wave of nausea hit me. This was a collection, a trophy room. But trophies of what? My grandfather. The quiet, distant man who sent me a $5 bill on my birthday. My breath fogged in the suddenly frigid air. I backed toward the stairs, my light sweeping over the macabre display. That's when I saw the notebook. It sat on a small, central desk, the only piece of furniture besides the shelves. A simple, black leather-bound journal. My hand trembled as I opened it. The pages were filled with my grandfather's cramped, precise handwriting. But the entries weren't dates or memories. They were names, dozens of names, and next to each name, a single, meticulously described object. Megan Hill, blue hair ribbon, found near Creek Bend, July 78. Robert Vance, brass Zippo lighter, parking lot of the Pine Tavern, October 82. The last entry, the ink fresher than the others, simply read, "The cabin. It needs to be fed. It remembers. It always remembers." I slammed the book shut, the sound like a gunshot in the silent room. I stumbled down the stairs, locked the attic door, and threw the silver key into the woods behind the cabin. I spent the next few hours in a state of numb shock, sitting on the sofa, watching the tree line through the immaculately clean window. I convinced myself I was overreacting. The old man had gone senile, living out here alone. He decollected lost things, made up stories. The notebook was the rambling of a lonely, confused mind. The cabin was just a cabin. I needed to get a grip. I decided to stay one more night, pack up in the morning, and never return. I'd sell it to some unsuspecting city couple looking for a rustic getaway. Let them deal with the weird vibes and the creepy attic. That decision, that moment of false safety, was my biggest mistake. As dusk fell, the cabin changed. The silence became a presence. The scratching at the stairs returned, louder now, more insistent. Then came the whispers, not from one place, but from all around me, seeping from the wood paneling itself. A faint, layered murmur of different voices, different ages, all speaking at once, just below the threshold of understanding. I could feel them, the owners of those objects upstairs, their residual presence bleeding out of their tokens. The air grew thick and cold. The sweet rot smell intensified, now carrying a coppery, metallic undertone. I barricaded myself in the small downstairs bathroom, the only room without wood paneling. I pressed my back against the cool tile, listening to the cabin wake up. The floorboards upstairs creaked with the weight of careful, pacing steps. A child's laughter, clear and bright, echoed down the hall, followed by a man's guttural sob. Then the knocking started. Not on the door. Inside the walls. A slow, deliberate tap, 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 moving around the room, circling me. That's when the internal monologue in my head shifted. It wasn't my voice anymore. It was a collage of thoughts, of fears, of final moments. I saw flashes behind my eyes, the crush of dark water, the searing pain of a fall, the blinding glare of headlights, the terrifying grip of unknown hands. I was feeling the deaths of the people whose names were in that book. The cabin wasn't just remembering them. It was replaying their ends, and it was making me experience them. It was feeding on my terror, just as it had fed on my grandfather's, and probably his father's before him. This place was a predator, and memories were its sustenance. The climax broke with the sound of splintering wood. The attic door, which I had locked, exploded outward, not from force, but from the sheer pressure of the things pushing against it from the other side. I didn't see ghosts, not in the traditional sense. I saw strange human-shaped impressions of absolute cold and despairing down the staircase. They flowed like black water, spreading across the ceiling and walls of the main room, their collective whispers rising to a deafening chorus of anguish. The temperature plummeted. My breath came in ragged, visible gasps. The central stain, darker and more defined than the others, solidified at the foot of the stairs. It had the rough shape of my grandfather, but twisted, hollow, a conduit for the cabin's hunger. It pointed a shadowy hand not at me, but at the wall beside the fireplace. The wood paneling there shimmered and became transparent, like a window into another layer of the house. I saw a scene, my grandfather, younger, frantic, trying to board up a different, older door in the foundation stone. He was weeping, and behind that door, something ancient and patient shifted. It wasn't a ghost. It was the land itself, a consciousness of possessive, hungry memory that had bound itself to the first structure built here. The cabin was its mouth, and my family had been its keepers, its providers. We didn't own the cabin. The cabin owned us. The vision shattered. The stains converged on me. The cold wasn't just on my skin. It was in my veins, in my thoughts, freezing my memories solid, trying to add them to the collection. With a surge of pure adrenaline, I did the only thing I could think of. I didn't run for the door. I ran for the attic. I scrambled up the stairs, through the press of the freezing, whispering dark, into the trophy room. I didn't grab the notebook. I grabbed the nearest shelf, the one holding the dirty red mitten and the cracked doll's head, and I hurled it with all my strength against the wall. The wood splintered. The objects clattered to the floor. A shriek of pure, psychic feedback tore through the cabin. The converging stains recoiled, swirling in chaotic, pained patterns. I was destroying the anchors. I grabbed another shelf, toppling it, then another. With each connection broken, the pressure in the room lessened. The cold receded a fraction. I was a madman, smashing my grandfather's legacy, my inheritance, into kindling. Finally, panting and bleeding from a dozen cuts, I stood amidst the wreckage. The whispers had faded to a faint, distant echo. The cabin was just a cold, dark, quiet building again. I left at dawn. I didn't pack. I just got in my Jeep and drove. The image of that deeper, older door in the stone foundation burned into my mind. I never went back. I hired a lawyer to sell the land and the structure, as is, to a developer who planned to clear it. I heard through the grapevine that a mysterious fire consumed the cabin before the bulldozers even arrived. The official cause was faulty wiring. I know better. The story ends there for most people, but not for me, because lately, in my new apartment in the heart of the city, I've been finding things, small, ordinary things. A single cufflink on my bathroom counter, a a stranger's grocery list on my kitchen table, a vintage brooch in my sock drawer, and last night, as I was trying to fall asleep to the familiar hum of traffic, I heard it, just once. A soft, polite, and utterly deliberate tap, tap, tap from inside the wall behind my headboard. It remembers, and it followed me home. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you felt that chill down your spine, you're not alone. The unknown is often the most terrifying thing of all. If you enjoyed this tale, please give this video a like. It helps more people find these stories. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next journey into the dark. And I am genuinely curious, what's the strangest, most inexplicable object you've ever found in your home? Let me know in the comments below. Story 5. The night I learned about Highway 37. I never should have turned down Highway 37. My name is Ava, and that's the last decision I made as the person I used to be. It was supposed to be a simple drive from my cousin's wedding in Sacramento back to my apartment in Portland. A long haul, sure, but I'd done it before. I was running late, thanks to an emotional goodbye that stretched too long, and the dashboard clock glowed a taunting 11:37 p.m. My GPS, with its cheerful blue line, suggested a faster route that would shave 40 minutes off my trip. A gray line snaking away from the familiar I-5 and into the pitch-black cradle of the Siskiyou Mountains. Highway 37. I tapped it without a second thought. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not the pine-fresh scent of a mountain night, but a damp, mineral odor, like wet stones and cold earth, that seeped in through the vents even with the recirculation on. The second was the silence. My radio, which had been humming with a late-night talk show, fizzed into static the moment my tires hit the new asphalt. Just white noise, like the sound of falling snow. I fiddled with the dial, finding nothing but that same hollow hiss on every frequency. The third detail was the reflectors, or lack thereof. The yellow cat's eyes that usually line the edges of a dark road were absent. Only the thin, wavering beam of my headlights defined the world, and beyond that, an absolute void. The road itself was strangely smooth, a black ribbon unfurling into nothing, with no mile markers, no signs, not even a discarded beer, can to suggest anyone else had ever been this way. The trees here were wrong. They weren't the tall, proud firs I was used to. They were hunched and gnarled, their branches twisted like arthritic fingers clawing at a sky devoid of stars. My high beams would catch them for a moment, and they seemed to lean inward over the road, creating a tunnel that felt less like nature and more like a throat. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white. Just a road, I muttered to myself, the sound of my own voice, a tiny, pathetic rebellion against the swallowing quiet. It's just a dark, creepy road. You've watched too many movies, but the rationalization felt thin, papery. A real fear, the kind that lives in your spine and not your head, was was starting to uncoil. Have you ever been truly alone on a road at night? I don't mean the comfortable solitude of a familiar freeway with distant taillights. I mean the kind of isolation where the world beyond your windshield ceases to exist, and you become a single, fragile point of light moving through an ancient, uncaring dark. What's the most isolated you've ever felt? I drove for what felt like an hour, the clock now frozen at 12:04 a.m. It never changed. I checked my phone. No service. The GPS map had gone gray. The cheerful blue line vanished, replaced by a pulsating dot in the center of a blank screen. I was a pixel in a void. That's when I saw the first figure. Just a dark, upright shape at the extreme edge of my headlights, standing perfectly still among the twisted trees. My heart hammered against my ribs. A deer, I thought. It has to be a deer. But as I passed, the light swept over it, and the silhouette was all wrong, too tall, too straight, with a strange, elongated proportion. It didn't move. It just stood, watching. I accelerated, my breath coming in short gasps. 10 minutes later, I saw another, and another. They were spaced at irregular intervals, always just at the periphery, always facing the road. Never moving. Were they the same one? Had it somehow gotten ahead of me? The damp stone smell grew stronger, now tinged with something else, something organic and rotten, like spoiled meat and wet leaves. Then the road began to curve, a long, gentle bend to the left, and in the middle of my lane, illuminated by my beams, was a chair. A simple wooden kitchen chair, placed with deliberate precision on the double yellow line. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching a protest that was instantly eaten by the dense air. The car skidded to a halt about 20 feet from it. I sat there, engine idling, staring. It was just a chair, but its presence here in this nowhere place was an act of profound violence against reason. Who would put it here? Why? My mind raced. Was this some kind of trap? A prelude to a carjacking? I peered into the woods, looking for the joker, the threat, the human explanation. I saw only the still, dark figures between the trees. More of them now, closer. I made a decision. I threw the car into reverse, intending to back up, turn around, and get the hell off this road. I looked in the rearview mirror. Another chair, identical, was now sitting in the middle of the lane behind me. It hadn't been there 10 seconds ago. Panic, pure and electric, shot through me. I was trapped between them. A whimper escaped my throat. I had to go forward. There was no other choice. I put the car back in drive, edged forward, and swerved around the chair in front of me, my passenger side tires dipping onto the soft, unseen shoulder. As I passed it, I could have sworn the seat of the chair was stained dark, as if something had been sitting there, leaking. I sped up, the car lurching back onto the asphalt. The figures in the woods were keeping pace, not running, but somehow always there, a gallery of silent observers. My headlights then caught something ahead, a break in the tree line. A building. A small, shabby gas station, its fluorescent lights buzzing a sickly yellow in the blackness. A wave of dizzying relief washed over me. People, light, reality. I nearly sobbed. I pulled off the road, the gravel crunching loudly under my tires, a wonderfully normal sound. The station was old, a single pump that looked like it hadn't been used in decades, and a small shack with a sign that read open in flickering red letters. I didn't care. It was a sanctuary. I stumbled out of the car, the cold night air biting through my sweater. The mineral smell was overpowering here, mixed with the pungent odor of old gasoline. I hurried to the door of the shack and pushed it open. A bell jingled overhead. Inside was a single room lit by that buzzing fluorescent tube. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with dusty cans and faded packets. Behind a counter littered with old magazines sat an old man. He had a gaunt face, deep-set eyes, and gnarled hands resting on the glass. Didn't look up from his newspaper. "We're closed," he said, his voice like grinding stones. "Please," I begged, my voice trembling. "My phone doesn't work. I am lost. I need to know how to get back to the I-5. He slowly lowered his paper. His eyes were a pale, milky blue. He looked at me, not with surprise or concern, but with a weary, ancient recognition. "You shouldn't be on 37, he said. "I know that now." "How do I get off it?" "Can't," he said simply, picking his paper back up. "Once you're on it, you see it through to the end." "What does that mean? What is this place?" "Those things in the woods," he sighed, a sound of immense fatigue. "They're not in the woods, girl. The woods are in them. This road, it's a fold. A place that got turned inside out a long time ago. The things that lived here got stuck on the outside. They're lonely. They watch. And sometimes they invite folks in to stay." My blood ran cold. "The chairs." He nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Markers. For the ones they've chosen. You saw yours. That means you're almost to the end of your drive." He finally looked at me again, and his expression was one of pity. "Best get back in your car. Keep driving straight. Don't stop again. Not for anything you see. Not even for me if I am standing in the road next time. The only way off 37 is to reach the other side." "What's on the other side?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He just went back to his paper, the conversation clearly over. I stood there, frozen in terror, then fled back to my car. The false safety of the gas station's light was now a cruel joke. It was part of the trap, a diorama of normalcy to deepen the despair. I started the car and pulled back onto the highway. The road ahead was darker than ever. The figures were no longer just at the edges. They were standing on the shoulders now mere feet from the asphalt. I could see them more clearly as my lights swept past. They weren't people. They were approximations, shaped from shadow and bark, and clumped dark earth. Their faces were smooth, featureless stone, but I felt their attention like a physical weight. And they were turned, every single one, to watch me pass. I drove, tears streaming down my face, muttering, "Don't stop, don't stop, don't stop," like a prayer. The road began to slope downward into a deep valley. At the bottom, the trees finally fell away completely, opening into a vast, flat basin under a starless sky. And in the center of the basin, illuminated by a single stark shaft of moonlight that broke through the perpetual cloud, was a circle of chairs. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all identical wooden kitchen chairs, arranged in perfect concentric rings. And on every single chair sat a figure, motionless, facing the center of the circle where one chair stood empty. My chair. The road led right to it, ending in a small loop in front of the empty seat. This was the end of Highway 37. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop 50 yards from that terrible circle. I couldn't breathe. This was it, the invitation to sit, to stay, to become one of the watchers in the woods. I threw the car into reverse, but the engine only whined in protest. It was dead. All the electronics in the dashboard had gone dark. The silence was absolute. I looked out at the circle. As one, every single figure slowly turned its stone face toward me. No movement of necks, just a seamless, impossible rotation. They were waiting. I did the only thing I could think of. I got out of the car. My legs were jelly. The damp, rotten smell was so thick I could taste it. I took a step forward, not toward the circle, but parallel to it, along the edge of the basin, my eyes fixed on the ring of silent witnesses. I would walk. I would walk out of this valley. A low sound began then, not from the figures, but from the ground itself. A deep, seismic groan, as if the earth was shifting. The basin floor ahead of me cracked open, a fissure splitting the dirt with a sound like tearing canvas. And from the fissure, things began to pull themselves out. They were made of the same stuff as the watchers clotted earth, rock, root, but they were not still. They moved with a terrible, jerking fluidity, rising and beginning to shambling toward me, between me and any hope of escape. They were the ones who said no to the invitation, the ones who tried to run. This was their fate, to wander the edges forever. I backed away toward my dead car, toward the circle. There was no way out. The shambling things closed in from the sides. The watchers observed, their silent invitation now a sentence. I was cornered. My back hit the cold metal of my car door. I looked at the empty chair in the center, gleaming in that unnatural moonlight. A profound, chilling resignation settled over me. It was either the chair or be pulled apart by the things from the fissure. At least the chair was still. At least the watching was quiet. I don't remember walking toward it. One moment I was by the car. The next I was standing before the empty seat. The wood was cold and smooth under my trembling hand. I turned and slowly lowered myself onto it. The moment I made contact, a jolt, like a static shock, but deep in my bones, went through me. The world didn't go dark. It flattened. The sounds groaning earth, the wind muffled into that same radio static I heard hours before. My body felt heavy, immovable, rooted. My vision didn't blur, but it fixed, locked into a single wide-angle view of the basin, the road, the dark mouth of the valley id driven down. I couldn't turn my head. I couldn't blink. I could only see and wait. I understood now. The watching wasn't a punishment. It was the purpose. To see the next set of headlights appear at the top of the valley. A tiny, brave point of light beginning its descent down Highway 37. To observe the subtle, unsettling details they would notice. The smell, the silence, the shapes in the trees. To feel the ancient, lonely hope that this time the driver might be the one to break the fold. And to know, with a certainty that seeped into my petrifying soul, that they would not. I am still here, in my chair. I am waiting, and I can see your headlights now, just starting down the hill. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you felt that chill, that sense of dread, you know how powerful these tales can be. Don't let the fear stop here. Dive deeper into the unknown, hit that subscribe button, and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. And down in the comments, I have to ask, if you saw that chair on a lonely road, would you stop? Or would you drive right through it? Let me know. Thank you for listening until the end. Your support means more than you know. Leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe to the channel if you'd like more nights like this. Please share this story with your friends who enjoy listening in the dark. For now, rest and let the rain continue.